Hello， 大家好，欢迎回到北美韭菜日记，我是九九。今天带来一期 Tom Lee 最新 CNBC 的采访，时间是在3月30号上周三。Tom Lee 也是我频道里的常客了，我最早开始 cover 他的一些观点，应该就是在21年年初的时候。虽然他推荐的很多股票，除了比特币，其他的说实话我个人兴趣不是很大，但是这一年多 follow 下来，不得不说他还是有一些自己的东西的。简单给不太熟悉的朋友们回顾一下他过去的战绩。20年10月份开始大力唱多传统能源股， OIH 就是他的爱股之一。然后整个21年能源股这边也是经历过几次大大小小的起伏，但是每次他都出来坚定的看多。可以看到 OIH 自从他推荐以来，股价从90多涨到了现在的快300，翻了3倍。当然了，今年碰到俄乌战争，让能源股再度爆发，这里面也多多少少有一些运气成分，毕竟战争这种事情谁也预测不了。另外一个他的成名战绩就是21年对美股大盘的预测。年初当大盘还在3700点的时候，他说年底会涨到4600点。当时的市场情绪是大部分投资人都觉得美股在经历了20年一整年的疯牛之后，差不多要进入调整阶段了，很多人甚至也开始恐高。但是 Tom Lee 大哥说不要慌，21年美股还要继续再涨 25%。这个当时被很多人看来是无脑看多的目标价，结果在6月份的时候就达到了。然后大哥就再度上调了目标价，说标普年底看到4800。可以看一下21年12月31号标普的位置，最终是收在了4796。此处我觉得应该给 Tom Lee 大哥一些鲜花和掌声。对于今年的整体局势，面对加息和流动性收紧，年初的时候他说不是特别看好上半年大盘的走势，说 likely to be treacherous， 非常凶险，但是他不认为美股的长牛会因此被打破。然后在前2周的时候，在节目上承认说自己好像有些过度乐观了。不过最近股市触底反弹了这一波之后，大哥在最新一期的节目里说，他认为之前的低点很有可能就已经是底部了。虽然宏观上依旧存在很多不确定性，但是股市表现的却异常坚挺，大盘重回新高指日可待。在进入正片之前呢，还是拜托大家能给本期视频来个一键3连。做视频加字幕都很花时间很花精力，我这个频道不仅不收费，还自掏腰包去订阅各种会员服务，唯一的请求就是希望大家能够留下一个赞好。 OK， 那么废话不多说，一起来看看 Tom Lee 是怎么说的。
You say that stocks are quote whispering bottom. What does that mean?
Well, I think stocks are communicating a very different message than the apparent macro that we're seeing, because it's obvious there's inflation problems. Restoration Hardware is making that pretty clear, and we know the Fed's quite hawkish, and we know there's even commodity risk because of all the Russian-Ukraine war. And so I think in general we should be really cautious about the macro, but at the same time the stock market is acting far more resilient than one would expect. In fact, over the past couple of weeks, I think there have been a lot of quantitative signals that have really signaled bottom, whether it's successive 1% days or positioning. And in the past, it's always been better to listen to the market, and I think it's really whispering pretty loudly that we've bottomed.
Yeah, but I mean, whispering implies that you're not ready to yell bottom. What gets you there?
Well, I think with each day that's passing, we're a lot more confident. The glib answer is if we make new highs, then it's really validated that we've bottomed. But so far, we're above the 200-day. It looks like we've broken the downtrend. I'd love to see more strength from technology, but Scott, I would say I think it's, our sort of view is we've probably made the low for the first half of 2022 on February 24th, which is the day of the invasion. And hopefully this all translates into the markets holding and then being very strong in the second half.
That's an interesting headline, and that's what it's going to be. We've probably made the low for the first half. I think that's what people are going to hang on. Jonathan Krinsky, who I know you know of well, put out a note this afternoon that said, quote, while we're nearing April, historically a strong month for equities, our sense is the recent rally has borrowed from some of those gains. You agree with that?
Again, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of logic to what Jonathan's saying, because, if we just think about how the next 20 trading days will look, I don't think we're going to necessarily get positive developments, because earnings might be challenged. We're going to hear companies talk about supply chain issues and inflationary pressures, but the stock market is hanging in there pretty strongly, and I think it's because institutional and retail investors sort of positioned for a recession in early March, and now if we don't have one, I think stocks have quite a lot of upside.
Yeah, but we're going to be on the clock the moment that the yield curve inverts, right? I mean, you know that, and that's going to start dominating the narrative. So how do we get over that hump?
Yeah, the yield conversion is a big deal because we know a lot of people are watching it, and we know a lot of systems and algorithms are going to react to it. But we did put a pretty big study out on it this morning that one of the reasons why you might have to mollify or reduce how much weight you put on the yield curve is that the yield curve right now is reflecting what we call inflation backwardation, meaning if you look at the inflation curves, okay, which looks at the tips and nominal yields, bond market yields have to reflect what the market's expecting for inflation. And the market is expecting an inflation spike in the near term, but in the out years, pretty normal inflation. That means that the sort of normal yield curve is going to be inverted, but the real yield curve is actually quite normal. That's something we highlighted in. That's very different than 06 in 2019, because at that time, the real cost of money, okay, adjusting for inflation, actually did invert. The Fed was indeed raised rates enough that real money turned expensive short term. Today, the real cost of money in the 2-year is actually still very cheap compared to 10-year money. And I think that chart's actually is highlighting that.
最近财经类媒体头条就是国债收益率曲线倒挂了，这个也是我自己关注比较密切的一个指标。一句话总结就是，每当10年期的国债收益率和2年期的国债收益率的差值为负的时候，就被我们称为收益率曲线倒挂。反映在这张图表上，就是这个曲线跌到0以下的位置了。而每当收益率曲线开始倒挂的时候，历史经验告诉我们的是，经济在之后的1到2年内就会进入衰退期了。网上已经有很多专门讲收益率曲线倒挂的视频了，我这里就不多做解释。但是想稍微多提一句的就是，虽然收益率曲线在过去几十年内的确都成功预测出了接下来的经济衰退，但是在时间上的精确度却还是欠缺了一点，所以并不能作为你去 timing the market 卖股票的依据。可以看一下这张图表里面统计的一些数据，过去50年里，收益率曲线倒挂开始到股市见顶，大盘在时间和空间维度上的变化情况。在时间上，平均跨度是18个月，就是当收益率曲线开始倒挂之后，大盘还要继续上涨18个月才算是见顶了。在这段时间里，标普的平均涨幅为 19.13%， 这些都还是平均的。如果分别去看每一次收益率曲线倒挂，也会发现在时间和空间维度上差别是很大的。比如最晚的一次1965年，大盘又再度上涨了35个月，将近3年才见顶。98年和05年的这2次分别又等了22个月才见顶。19年的这次比较特殊，碰到了疫情，所以在半年之后就直接崩盘了。但是1980年这次就非常快，在2个月之后股市就见顶了。我个人目前来看还是比较倾向于用这个指标去判断经济衰退的，毕竟这是集合了整个债市交易员们智慧的结晶了。相比股市，还要去研究公司行业的基本面，交易国债的这群人整天研究的就是宏观经济，也没有太多的散户参与者，所以相对来说预测整个经济基本面的效果，我觉得还是会比股市好上很多的。不过还是那句话，即使经济真的出现了放缓甚至衰退的话，也不代表你就应该立马要卖掉你手里的优质股票了。因为第一，你判断不出来股市见顶的具体时间；第二，就是我认为好的公司是可以穿越熊牛的。假设说你卖的点位不好的话，那很有可能是丢了芝麻捡了西瓜。OK， 继续来看采访。
Look, there are people who are clearly suggesting as well that if you're looking at the 210 spread for the yield curve, maybe you're looking in the wrong place. Leisman and others have made that point. Let's welcome in Josh Brown, obviously from halftime into the conversation. Tom, I'd like to do that. So, Josh, I mean, if you look, it's good to have you back. If you look at the rally, utilities have been doing really well. It's been very top-heavy, led by Apple and some of these other names. Does that cast any doubt over the substance of this rally, how valid, if you want to use that word, it actually is?
The rally was pretty textbook. Technically speaking, the stocks that had been beaten up the most were the ones that led the advance. I wouldn't say they bottomed first, but they definitely put on the fireworks show. And a lot of that is now being unwound. You have ARK off 4%, Peloton down 9%, Roku, Shop, Roblox, Teladoc, all the names you would expect to be the worst performers when the trend resumes, the primary trend resumes, are the worst performers. When I talk about primary trend versus counter trend, it's not jargon. The primary trend for most stocks in the market is down. Has been since last February, by the way. Most stocks, not all stocks and not the biggest stocks, but for most stocks, they peaked over a year ago and they've been in a downtrend. That the counter trend is what we just experienced over the last week, where they've been having this rock and roll rally. It's falling apart pretty quickly. You lose 3 days in 1 day. And that's very, very textbook, very typical of how a bear market rally ends. In the meantime, what's the prevailing trend? What's the real trend? WTI up 3% today. Look at the energy stocks rocking. Look at consumer discretionary underperforming. This is what the real trend is. And I would tell you one other thing.
So
it's actually not complicated. It's actually not complicated to be in this market right now. I think if you think about the VIX as like the simplest shorthand for how people are behaving, we're in a fairly well-defined range. We're in a VIX regime where whenever you see us 28, 29, get your buy list ready because that's overdone. And then when you see us down at, we hit 18.9 yesterday on the VIX. That's pretty much as good as it's gotten. And that's been the case since March 2020, this new VIX regime. So it's not that complicated. It's kind of, Judge, it's kind of like, go ahead.
I feel like we have a distinct difference of opinion here on something that's important. I've had Tom Lee just come out and suggest that the lows for the first half are in the market. And I might also suggest that a first half that he had prior described as being treacherous. And certainly he was correct. I still hear you using the term bear market rally. It sounds like you think that's what this is. And Tom Lee, do you take issue with that? Is that what this is, Tom Lee?
Well, we're in that no man's land zone where neither view can be decided, and we'll only have the answer if we make new highs. I would probably say the higher probability in our minds is we're going to make our way to new highs this year, even before the first half. So I would still view this as the market had a huge correction, priced really, more than 40% of stocks priced a pretty deep recession. And if we don't have that recession, stocks are really better to buy.
Josh, and before I let Tom go, I want your rebuttal up to that. Why is his view wrong?
I actually don't think Tom and I disagree. I'm giving you the range. I'm not saying this has to get disastrously worse, and I would never rule out us making a new high before the end of this year. Understand that stocks 3 out of 4 years finished the year up. So I don't want to give you the impression that I'm telling you it's hopeless. I'm giving you a very well-defined VIX regime that's been in place now. We're going into year 3 of this. It works pretty well. It won't work forever. But remember, we were in a 10 to 20 regime. The VIX would hang out at 10, 11. CNBC.com would write articles about how traders can't make money on Wall Street, right? Remember that? And then you would get these spikes, but the spikes would go to 20. Now it's a different game. The Fed is not on our side anymore. They're removing liquidity. They're hiking rates. They're talking about hiking rates when they're not hiking rates. So now it's 20 to 30. You saw the movie The Irishman, right? So when the guy pulls out the gun in the courtroom and points it at Al Pacino, and then his son comes running over and pulls it, what does he say? He explains. When it's, you charge when it's a gun. When it's a knife, you run, right? When the VIX is under 20, you already know that you're at the more placid end of the pool. It's not going to last long. But when you're back at 28, 29, 30, which is where we were right around March 14th, March 15th, before the Fed, that's when you have to be doing your buying. You have to buy something. So this is not about taking your portfolio to fully invested zero. It's just about being aware. This is the environment. I wish it were other, but it's not. It's not that bull market. It's not that low volatility grind higher. It is not that. It's this.
简单点评一下 Josh Brown 的发言。相比 Tom Lee 的发言来说，我觉得他的发言含金量可能就没有那么的高了。总结下来就是说，中长期局势是什么样子的，我现在没有观点，不敢看牛，也不敢看熊。但是短期市场波动性这么高，他觉得可以利用这个特性小捞一把。VIX 涨到30的时候卖出，跌到20的时候买入就好了。对于这个策略，我只能说大家听听就好了。市场走向如果真的通过这么简单的一个指标就可以判断的话，那可能所有人都能赚到钱了。当然你也不能说他这个方法完全就是错的了， 但是我觉得最大的问题就是会丢了西瓜捡了芝麻，因为市场不可能是一直处于这种模糊不定的状态的，最终一旦大趋势形成，不管是走牛还是走熊，如果没有及时调整思路的话，那很有可能卖飞或者是被套牢。而且很多基本面良好能穿越熊牛的公司，对我个人来说，卖飞可能比套牢更难受。最后一起来看一下 Tom Lee 是怎么回应的。
I don't know. Ed Yardeni today on the half. Tom Lee, our conclusion is that this is still a bull market. That's what he said. 5,000 to 6,000 is his range on the S&P. And this is a guy who was talking not 2 weeks ago about stagflation. Today he made the point with me on the halftime report that even if you have stagflation, that the stock market can go up in the face of that. I feel like everybody is now trying to make a more bullish case when not all that much has changed in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, Scott, I mean, and I heard that interview. It was really useful. First of all, the real cost of money 10-year is still negative because 10-year inflation break-evens are higher than where the nominal is. So it should argue for PE expansion. But I think compared to 2 weeks ago, the market had a huge test because we had, I think, a lot of negative developments in headlines over the last 2 weeks. And instead of the market falling further, it was kind of revealed that people had positioned really for already a lot of this and markets have been really resilient. So I would say it's another reason why I think the market is whispering we've already bottomed. Maybe more than whispering.
Tom Lee 的观点依然非常鲜明，还是保持他啦啦队长万天看牛的作风，认为股市已经见底了。但是听下来感觉更多的是从市场情绪方面来分析的，觉得说过去几周面对扑面而来的利空消息，市场表现得异常坚挺，而且不管是机构还是散户都已经做好了应对经济衰退、股市走熊的打算了，所以从这方面去看的话，他认为股市可能不会二次探底了。虽然说 Tom Lee 在过去1年多的时间里几次预测的都非常准确，但是我觉得预测大盘走势这种事情，咱们最好还是只是拿来作为参考，毕竟没有谁能保证说自己的预测每次都能准确。作为一名理性投资人，一定要保持独立思考，为自己的钱包负责。对于2022年大盘的整体走势，如果你有自己的看法，非常欢迎大家在评论区里和大家一起交流探讨。如果觉得本期视频给你带来一些收获的话，走之前千万不要忘记留下一个赞好。OK， 那本期视频就暂时先带来到这里了，我们下期视频再见，拜了个拜。